My name is Ben Carter, and for the past 3 weeks, my primary view has consisted of an endless expanse of emerald green, punctuated by the occasional jagged peaks of the Cascade Mountains. I'm perched atop one of those peaks, specifically in a small, slightly dilapidated fire lookout tower that sways ever so gently in the persistent mountain breeze. It's a solitary existence, but that's exactly what I was looking for when I applied for this job. After a particularly messy breakup and the subsequent soul-crushing monotony of my office job in Seattle, I needed an escape. A complete disconnect. The advertisement for a seasonal fire lookout position in the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest felt like it was tailor-made for my situation. Remote location? Check. Minimal human interaction? Double check. A chance to spend my days surrounded by nature and get paid for it? Sign me up. The application process was surprisingly straightforward. A few online forms, a brief phone interview with a no-nonsense ranger named Miss Davies, and suddenly I was packing my bags for a summer of solitude. Miss Davies was a woman of few words, but she was clear about the responsibilities. Monitor the surrounding forest for any signs of fire, report anything suspicious immediately, and maintain the upkeep of the lookout tower. She also mentioned something about a specific set of guidelines I'd find in the tower, rules that were absolutely essential to follow. At the time, I just nodded, eager to get away from the city and into the quiet embrace of the wilderness. The drive up to the trailhead was long and winding, the paved road eventually giving way to a rutted dirt track that tested the limits of my aging Subaru. The final mile was a steep hike, my backpack feeling heavier with each upward step. Finally, through a thicket of pines, I saw it my home for the next few months. The lookout tower was a simple, square wooden structure perched on a sturdy metal frame, elevating it about 15 feet above the ground. A narrow wooden staircase led up to the single room that would be my living quarters, my observation post, and my sanctuary. It looked a little weathered, the paint peeling in places, but it seemed solid enough. 360-degree windows offered an unparalleled view of the surrounding wilderness, a breathtaking panorama of rolling hills, dense forests, and distant, snow-capped mountains. The first few days were idyllic. I spent my time settling in, unpacking my meager belongings, and familiarizing myself with the equipment. There was a radio for communication with the ranger station, a pair of high-powered binoculars, and a detailed map of the area marked with grid coordinates. I also found a well-worn logbook where previous lookouts had documented their observations, weather patterns, and the occasional wildlife sighting. True to Miss Davies' word, I found a manila envelope tucked away in a drawer. Inside were several typewritten pages titled Fire Lookout Protocol Important Guidelines. I skimmed through the initial sections, which covered standard operating procedures for fire detection and reporting. It was all pretty straightforward stuff. But as I delved deeper, the guidelines started to take a decidedly strange turn. The first unusual rule was about the time of day. Under no circumstances should you be outside the tower between the hours of 1100 p.m. and 300 a.m. This struck me as odd. What could possibly be so dangerous in the woods during those specific hours? Wild animals. I figured a sturdy tower should offer ample protection. I shrugged it off, assuming it was some kind of precaution against getting lost in the dark or encountering nocturnal wildlife. The next rule was even more perplexing. Do not, under any circumstances, respond to any knocks or calls that occur during the restricted hours, 1100 p.m., 300 a.m. Even if the voice sounds familiar or distressed, do not open the door or attempt to communicate. This sent a shiver down my spine. What kind of scenario would necessitate such a specific and ominous warning? Was there some kind of dangerous individual or something else out in these woods? The rules continued, each one more unsettling than the last. If you observe any unusual lights or movements in the forest, do not investigate. Report your observations to the ranger station during daylight hours only. Maintain a consistent fire in the stove, even during warmer nights. Never let the fire go out completely. This one was particularly strange, as it was the middle of summer and the nights, while cool, certainly didn't warrant a constant fire. Do not leave any food or garbage outside the tower. All waste must be sealed in airtight containers and stored inside. This seemed reasonable enough to avoid attracting animals. If you hear any singing or chanting coming from the woods, especially during the night, do not attempt to listen or discern the words. Turn up the radio and focus on your duties. This one made my blood run cold, singing or chanting, in the middle of the wilderness. Once a week, on Wednesday evenings, place a small, sealed container of fresh water on the easternmost point of the tower platform. There was no explanation for this ritual. It just stated it as a mandatory procedure. If you feel an overwhelming sense of dread or paranoia, focus on your breathing and repeat the phrase, "The forest is silent. The mountains are still." Do not let these feelings consume you. This rule implied that such feelings were not uncommon in this place. Under no circumstances should you venture more than 50 feet away from the base of the tower after nightfall. This further reinforced the idea that something dangerous lurked in the darkness. If you find any markings or symbols that appear unnatural or out of place, do not touch them. Note their location and report them to the ranger station. This suggested the possibility of something intentional happening in the woods. The final rule was the most disturbing of all. If, at any point, you see a figure watching you from the trees that does not appear to be human, do not make eye contact. Retreat inside the tower immediately, and do not look outside again until daylight. A figure that does not appear to be human. What kind of job had I stumbled into? As I finished reading the list, a knot of unease tightened in my stomach. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe these were just old rules, relics from a time when the area was more remote or faced different threats. Maybe Ms. Davies had forgotten to mention that most of them were outdated, but her emphasis on them being absolutely essential echoed in my mind, making it hard to dismiss them so easily. The first few nights passed without incident. I diligently followed the rules, staying inside after 1100 p.m., keeping a small fire burning in the stove, and making sure all my food waste was securely stored. The silence of the forest at night was profound, broken only by the occasional rustling of leaves or the distant hoot of an owl. It was peaceful, almost serene. Then came Wednesday. As instructed, I filled a small plastic container with fresh water and placed it on the eastern edge of the tower platform, just as dusk began to settle. I felt a little foolish performing this strange ritual, but the weight of the written rules compelled me. As I retreated inside, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. That night I had trouble sleeping. Every creak of the wooden tower, every rustle of leaves outside, sent a jolt of anxiety through me. I kept glancing at the clock, willing the hours to pass until the dreaded 1100 p.m. curfew. When the clock finally struck 11, I made sure all the windows were securely latched and the door was bolted. Around 1:30 am, I was jolted awake by a distinct sound, a soft, rhythmic knocking coming from the base of the tower. My heart pounded in my chest. The rules flashed through my mind. Do not, under any circumstances, respond to any knocks or calls that occur during the restricted hours. I held my breath, straining to hear over the frantic beating of my own heart. The knocking continued, a gentle, almost hesitant tap against the wooden supports of the tower. Then a voice, soft and low, called out my name. "Ben, Ben, are you there?" My blood ran cold. How if who knew my name? The voice sounded almost familiar, like someone I might have met briefly during my orientation. But the rules were clear. I squeezed my eyes shut, willing the voice to go away. "Ben, please, I need your help." The voice was laced with a desperate urgency that tugged at my conscience. It sounded like someone in genuine distress. My hand instinctively reached for the door latch, but the image of the rule sheet, with its stark warning, stopped me. I stayed frozen in my bed, my ears straining to hear any further sounds. The knocking stopped, and the voice fell silent. After what felt like an eternity, I finally drifted back to a fitful sleep, haunted by the sound of that desperate plea. The next morning, the sun rose in a blaze of orange and gold, painting the forest in a warm, inviting light. The events of the night felt surreal, like a bad dream. I cautiously approached the windows, scanning the area around the base of the tower. There was nothing out of the ordinary. No footprints, no signs of anyone having been there. I went about my usual morning routine, making coffee and preparing a simple breakfast. But the unease lingered. Who had been calling my name in the middle of the night? And why did the rules so vehemently forbid me from responding? As the day wore on, I found myself constantly looking out the windows, my eyes scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. The forest, which had once seemed so welcoming, now felt menacing, filled with unseen eyes and unheard whispers. That evening, as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the forest floor, I felt a growing sense of dread. The 1100 p.m. curfew loomed, and I couldn't shake the feeling that tonight would be different. I checked all the latches and bolts, making sure the tower was as secure as possible. I stoked the fire in the stove, watching the flames dance and flicker, a small beacon of warmth and light in the encroaching darkness. I turned on the radio. The static-filled airwaves a poor substitute for the comforting sounds of human voices. As the clock ticked closer to 11, I sat by the window, my gaze fixed on the surrounding woods. The darkness deepened, swallowing the trees and the trails, leaving only the faintest outlines against the starlit sky. The forest was silent, eerily so. Then, just as the clock struck 11, I heard it, a faint, almost ethereal sound drifting through the night air. Singing. A low, melodic chant that seemed to weave its way through the trees, carried on the gentle breeze. The rule about singing and chanting flashed through my mind. If you hear any singing or chanting coming from the woods, especially during the night, do not attempt to listen or discern the words. Turn up the radio and focus on your duties. My heart pounded in my chest. I fumbled for the radio dial, frantically turning it up until the static filled the small room, drowning out the haunting melody from the woods. I pressed my hands over my ears, trying to block out the sound, focusing on the crackling static and the flickering flames in the stove. The chanting continued for what felt like hours, a persistent, unsettling drone that vibrated through the floorboards of the tower. I squeezed my eyes shut, repeating the phrase from the rules like a mantra. The forest is silent, the mountains are still. The forest is silent, the mountains are still. Finally, as the first hint of dawn began to paint the eastern sky, the chanting faded away, leaving behind a heavy, oppressive silence. I lay in my bed, exhausted and terrified, wondering what kind of nightmarish place I had stumbled into. This was more than just a remote job. There was something deeply wrong here, something hidden in the shadows of the forest, and I had a feeling my summer of solitude was about to become a fight for survival. The morning after the chanting, I felt like I hadn't slept at all. My eyes were gritty, my head throbbed, and a persistent knot of anxiety remained clenched in my stomach. The forest outside looked deceptively peaceful under the bright morning sun, but I knew better now. The silence felt heavy, pregnant with unseen things. I tried to reach Davies on the radio, wanting to report the strange occurrences, the knocking, the voice, and especially the chanting. But the radio crackled with static, offering no connection to the outside world. I tried multiple times throughout the morning, but the result was always the same. It was as if I was completely cut off. The isolation, which had initially been appealing, now felt suffocating. I was alone with these strange rules, and the unsettling events they seemed designed to protect me from. I pored over the rule sheet again, searching for any clue, any explanation for what was happening. But the words remained cold and cryptic, offering no comfort or insight. Days turned into a blur of heightened vigilance and gnawing fear. Every shadow seemed to hold a hidden presence. Every rustle of leaves sounded like a whispered secret. I adhered to the rules religiously, finding a strange sort of comfort in their rigid structure amidst the growing chaos in my mind. The fire in the stove became my constant companion, its flickering warmth a small reassurance against the unseen cold that seemed to emanate from the surrounding woods. I kept it burning day and night, feeding it with the small supply of wood I had been provided, rationing it carefully, unsure when or if I would receive more. Wednesday evening arrived, and with it, the unsettling ritual of placing fresh water on the eastern platform. As I performed the task, my eyes darted nervously around the perimeter of the clearing. I felt exposed, vulnerable, even in the fading light. I hurried back inside, locking the door behind me, a sense of dread washing over me. That night, there was no knocking, no voice. The silence was absolute, almost suffocating. I found myself straining to hear any sound from the forest, my senses on high alert. Just as I was starting to think that maybe, just maybe, the strangeness had passed, I heard it again. The singing. It started faintly, a low, mournful melody that seemed to rise from the depths of the woods. Unlike the previous night's chanting, this was a song, albeit one that sent a chill down my spine. The language was unfamiliar, the tune haunting and melancholic. It sounded ancient, primal, like something that had echoed through these forests for centuries. I fought the urge to listen, to try and understand the words. The rule was clear: turn up the radio. I fumbled for the dial, my hands shaking, and blasted the static into the small room. But even over the noise, I could still hear the faint strains of the song seeping through the walls into my very bones. This time, the singing didn't stop with the dawn. It continued throughout the day, a constant, unsettling soundtrack to my isolated existence. It would fade in and out, sometimes growing louder, sometimes softer, but it was always there, a persistent reminder that I was not alone in these woods. By Thursday evening, I was on edge, sleep, deprived and terrified. The constant singing was driving me mad. I tried to distract myself, reading the tattered books I had brought with me, but the words blurred before my eyes. My mind fixated on the haunting melody drifting from the forest. That night, the singing finally stopped. The silence that followed was almost more unnerving than the song itself. I lay in bed, listening intently, every nerve in my body on high alert. Around 2:00 a.m., I was awakened by a different sound, a rhythmic tapping, like someone gently drumming on a hollow log. It seemed to be coming from somewhere nearby, just outside the tower. My heart leaped into my throat. The rules specifically warned against responding to knocks or calls, but this was different. This was a tapping, a steady, insistent rhythm. Curiosity, mixed with a healthy dose of fear, gnawed at me. I crept out of bed and cautiously approached the window. Peeking through a narrow opening in the curtains, I scanned the area around the base of the tower. The darkness was thick, the trees casting long, distorted shadows in the moonlight. I couldn't see anything. The tapping continued, a steady tap, 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 tap. It seemed to be coming from the eastern side of the tower, the same side where I placed the water offering. Against my better judgment, I decided to investigate. The rules forbade me from going outside between 11:00 p.m. and 3:00 a.m., but the tapping was so insistent, so deliberate. I had to know what was causing it. I grabbed the heavy flashlight I kept by my bedside and slowly made my way down the narrow wooden stairs. The tower creaked and groaned under my weight, the sound amplified in the stillness of the night. When I reached the bottom of the stairs, I hesitated. The darkness outside felt heavy, oppressive. I took a deep breath, trying to quell the fear that was churning in my gut, and unbolted the door. Stepping out onto the small platform at the base of the tower, I swept the beam of my flashlight around the clearing. The trees stood like silent sentinels, their branches reaching out like skeletal arms. The moonlight cast an eerie glow on the forest floor, illuminating patches of moss and fallen leaves. I followed the sound of the tapping, which seemed to be coming from just beyond the edge of the clearing, near a large moss-covered boulder. As I approached the boulder, the tapping stopped. I held my breath, listening intently. The only sound was the gentle rustling of leaves in the breeze. I shone my flashlight on the boulder, examining its surface. There was nothing there, just moss and lichen. Confused, I took a step closer, and then I saw it. Scratched into the surface of the boulder, almost hidden beneath a layer of moss, was a symbol. It was unlike anything I had ever seen before, a series of interconnected lines and circles that seemed to writhe and twist in on themselves. It looked ancient, almost otherworldly. The rule about strange markings flashed through my mind. If you find any markings or symbols that appear unnatural or out of place, do not touch them. Note their location and report them to the ranger station. My heart pounded in my chest. I had found one of the markings, but I couldn't report it to the ranger station because the radio was still dead. As I stared at the symbol, a sudden wave of dizziness washed over me. The air seemed to grow heavy, and the forest around me seemed to darken even in the moonlight. A feeling of intense dread, unlike anything I had ever experienced before, gripped me. I stumbled backward, away from the boulder, my flashlight beam shaking in my hand. I had a sudden, overwhelming urge to get back inside the tower, to lock myself in and never come out again. I turned and fled back towards the tower, scrambling up the stairs, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I slammed the door shut and bolted it, leaning against it, my heart still racing. I didn't look outside again that night. I huddled in my bed, pulling the blankets up to my chin, trying to block out the images of the strange symbol and the oppressive feeling it had evoked. The next day, the singing returned, even louder and more insistent than before. It was almost deafening, filling the small tower with its haunting melody. I tried everything to block it out earplugs, turning up the radio, but nothing worked. The song seemed to be coming from inside my own head. I was starting to lose my grip on reality. The isolation, the strange rules, the unsettling events, it was all taking its toll. I felt like I was trapped in some kind of nightmare, with no way to escape. On Saturday morning, I decided I couldn't take it anymore. The radio was still dead, and I hadn't seen or heard from anyone since I arrived. I had to try and make contact with the outside world. The rules forbade me from venturing more than 50 feet from the base of the tower after nightfall, but they said nothing about during the day. I decided to hike down to the trailhead and see if I could get a cell phone signal or if anyone had come looking for me. I packed a small backpack with some water, a first aid kit, and a few snacks. I left a note on the table explaining where I was going and set off down the trail. The hike down was uneventful. The forest was quiet, the singing finally having stopped. For the first time in days, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe I could get help. Maybe I could get out of here. When I reached the trailhead, my heart sank. There was no cell phone signal, and there were no signs of any recent visitors. The small parking area was empty. I sat down on a fallen log, feeling a wave of despair wash over me. I was completely alone. As I sat there, trying to figure out what to do, I noticed something on the ground near the edge of the forest. It was a small, sealed container, the same kind I had been using for the Wednesday water offering. Curiosity picked, I picked it up. It felt heavier than it should have. I shook it gently, but there was no sound. I hesitated for a moment, then carefully opened the container. Inside, nestled on a bed of soft moss, was a small, intricately carved wooden figure. It was vaguely humanoid in shape, but its features were distorted and unsettling. Its eyes were large and hollow, and its mouth was stretched into a silent scream. I stared at the figure, a feeling of profound unease creeping over me. Where had this come from? Was this what I was supposed to be offering water to? As I held the figure in my hand, I felt a sudden chill in the air. The forest around me seemed to grow darker, and I heard a faint rustling in the trees behind me. I turned around slowly, my heart pounding in my chest, and then I saw it. Standing at the edge of the tree line, watching me, was a figure. It was tall and gaunt, its limbs unnaturally long and thin. Its skin was pale and stretched taut over its bones, and its eyes glowed with an eerie, unnatural light. It didn't look human. The final rule flashed through my mind. If, at any point, you see a figure watching you from the trees that does not appear to be human, do not make eye contact. Retreat inside the tower immediately, and do not look outside again until daylight. My blood ran cold. I didn't make eye contact. I turned and ran, as fast as I could, back up the trail towards the tower. I didn't dare look back. I could feel its gaze on me, burning into my back. I ran until my lungs burned and my legs ached. The image of the gaunt, glowing, eyed figure seared into my mind. Finally, I burst through the clearing and scrambled up the stairs to the tower, slamming the door shut and bolting it behind me. I leaned against the door, gasping for breath, my body trembling. I didn't look out the windows. I didn't dare. I retreated to my bed, pulling the covers over my head, trying to shut out the terrifying image I had seen. I lay there for hours, listening to the frantic beating of my own heart, waiting for the sun to rise. I knew one thing for sure. Whatever was out there in the woods, it wasn't natural. And the rules were there for a reason. My summer of solitude had turned into a terrifying game of survival, and I had a feeling the stakes were about to get much higher. The hours that followed my panicked return to the tower were the longest and most terrifying of my life. I lay huddled in my bed, every muscle in my body tense, listening to the sounds of the forest. The wind rustled the leaves, branches creaked against the tower, and the distant hoot of an owl echoed through the darkness. Each sound sent a fresh wave of fear through me, my mind conjuring images of the gaunt figure with its glowing eyes. I didn't dare to look out the windows. The rule was clear: do not look outside again until daylight. I clung to that instruction like a lifeline, as if the simple act of keeping my eyes averted could somehow protect me from whatever was lurking out there. Sleep was impossible. My mind raced, replaying the encounter at the trailhead over and over again. The wooden figure in the container, the sudden chill, the rustling in the trees, and then the figure. There was no doubt in my mind that it wasn't human. Its unnatural proportions, its pale skin, its glowing eyes, it was something else entirely. And the rules, they made so much more sense now. They weren't just arbitrary precautions, they were designed to keep me safe from that. The curfew, the warning against responding to knocks or calls, the instruction to ignore unusual lights or movements, they were all about avoiding contact with whatever inhabited these woods. The water offering on Wednesday evenings, could it be some kind of appeasement? A ritual to keep the entity at bay? And the fire in the stove, even during warm nights, could it be that the fire somehow repelled it? As dawn finally broke, painting the eastern sky with streaks of pale pink and gold, I cautiously rose from bed. My body ached, and my mouth felt like sandpaper. I crept to the window, my heart pounding in my chest, and peered out. The forest looked peaceful, bathed in the soft morning light. There was no sign of the figure. No indication of the terror I had felt just hours before. It was as if the encounter had been a nightmare, a figment of my overactive imagination. But I knew it wasn't. I had seen it, and the fear it had instilled in me was very real. I spent the morning trying to reinforce the tower's defenses. I checked all the latches and bolts on the door and windows, making sure they were secure. I even pushed the heavy wooden table against the door for extra measure. It felt futile, like trying to barricade myself against a hurricane with a stack of playing cards, but it was all I could think to do. The radio remained stubbornly silent. I was still cut off from the outside world. The isolation felt heavier than ever, the silence punctuated only by the frantic beating of my own heart. Throughout the day, I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Every creak of the tower, every rustle of leaves outside, made me jump. I kept glancing out the windows, scanning the tree line for any sign of movement. That evening, as dusk began to settle, I felt a renewed sense of dread. The memory of the figure at the trailhead was still vivid in my mind. I knew I couldn't go through another night like the last one. I stoked the fire in the stove, feeding it more wood than usual, hoping the extra heat and light would offer some comfort. I turned on the radio. Even though it was just static, the noise a small distraction from the oppressive silence of the forest. As the clock approached 11, I retreated to my bed, pulling the blankets up to my chin. I squeezed my eyes shut, trying to block out the darkness and the fear that was gnawing at me. Around midnight, I heard it again, the tapping. It was coming from the eastern side of the tower, just like before. Tap, 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 tap. My blood ran cold. I remembered the symbol on the boulder, the wave of dizziness, the overwhelming sense of dread. I knew I shouldn't go outside. The rules were clear. But the tapping continued, insistent and rhythmic, almost hypnotic. It was as if something was calling to me, beckoning me to come out. I squeezed my eyes tighter, trying to block out the sound, repeating the phrase from the rules. The forest is silent, the mountains are still. But the tapping persisted, drilling into my consciousness. Suddenly, the tapping stopped. The silence that followed was even more unnerving. I lay there, holding my breath, waiting for something else to happen. Then I heard it, a soft, shuffling sound, like something dragging itself across the ground. It seemed to be coming from just outside the tower, right beneath my window. My heart pounded in my chest. I fought the urge to look, to see what was making the sound. But the image of the glowing eyes flashed through my mind, and I remained frozen in place. The shuffling sound continued, slowly circling the base of the tower. It was a sickening, dragging sound that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. I imagined some grotesque creature with twisted limbs and dragging claws circling its prey. After what felt like an eternity, the shuffling sound faded away, disappearing into the darkness of the forest. The silence that followed was heavy, oppressive. I didn't sleep at all that night. I lay in bed, listening to every sound, my mind filled with terrifying images. By morning, I was exhausted and on the verge of a complete breakdown. I knew I couldn't stay here. I had to get out. The radio was useless, and the hike down to the trailhead had been too dangerous. But there had to be another way. I remembered seeing a map of the area in the ranger station during my brief orientation. There might be another trail, another way out of these woods. I rummaged through my backpack and found the small, folded map I had been given. It was a detailed topographical map of the Gifford Pinchot National Forest, showing all the trails, rivers, and landmarks in the area. I spread the map out on the table and studied it carefully. The fire lookout tower was marked with a small symbol. I traced the surrounding area with my finger, looking for other trails. To the north, I saw a faint dotted line labeled Old Logging Road. It looked like it hadn't been maintained in years, but it seemed to lead down the other side of the mountain, eventually connecting to a larger road several miles away. It was a long shot, but it was the only option I had. I decided to leave that day. I couldn't spend another night in this tower, haunted by the tapping, the shuffling, and the memory of those glowing eyes. I packed my backpack with everything I could carry: food, water, my first aid kit, the map, and the rule sheet. I hesitated for a moment, then decided to leave the wooden figure behind. It felt wrong to take it with me, like tempting fate. Before leaving, I made sure the fire in the stove was completely out. The rule about keeping the fire burning had always seemed strange, and now I wondered if it was somehow attracting something. I took one last look around the small tower, my temporary sanctuary turned prison. It felt strange to be leaving, to be venturing out into the unknown, but I knew I had no choice. I unbolted the door and stepped out onto the platform. The forest was quiet, the morning sun filtering through the trees. I took a deep breath and started down the stairs. As I reached the bottom, I paused and looked around the clearing. Everything seemed normal, peaceful. But I knew the truth. I knew what lurked in the shadows. I turned and started walking north, following the faint outline of the old logging road on my map. The trail was overgrown and difficult to follow in places, but I pressed on, determined to get out of these woods. Hours passed. The trail wound its way through dense forest, over rocky terrain, and across small streams. I was exhausted and thirsty, but I kept going, driven by the fear of what might be behind me. As the afternoon wore on, the forest grew darker and more oppressive. The trees seemed to press in on me, their branches reaching out like grasping claws. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Suddenly I heard a sound, a faint snapping of twigs behind me. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. I didn't dare to turn around. The snapping sound came again, closer this time. I started to run, pushing myself forward, my lungs burning, my legs aching. I could hear something crashing through the undergrowth behind me, getting closer. I didn't look back. I just ran, fueled by pure terror. Then I stumbled and fell, landing hard on the rocky ground. Pain shot up my leg. I tried to get up, but my ankle twisted beneath me. I lay there for a moment, gasping for breath. The sound of crashing through the undergrowth, getting closer and closer. I knew this was it. There was nowhere left to run. Slowly, I turned my head, and then I saw it. Standing at the edge of the trees, watching me, was the figure. It was even more terrifying up close. Its gaunt face was expressionless, its glowing eyes fixed on me. It took a step closer, and then another. I tried to scramble backward to get away, but my injured ankle wouldn't support me. I was trapped. The figure continued to approach, its long, thin limbs moving with an unnatural grace. It reached out a skeletal hand towards me. I closed my eyes, bracing for the worst. But it never came. Instead, I heard a different sound. A high-pitched, screeching noise that seemed to pierce the very air around me. The figure recoiled, its glowing eyes widening in what looked like pain or surprise. It turned and fled back into the trees, disappearing as quickly as it had appeared. I lay there for a moment, stunned, trying to understand what had just happened. Then, I heard the sound again. The screeching. It seemed to be coming from above me. I looked up and saw it. Perched on a branch high above, its black feathers ruffled, its sharp beak open in a silent scream, was a large raven. It was staring directly at the spot where the figure had been standing. The raven let out another piercing screech, and then it spread its massive wings and took flight, soaring away into the darkening sky. I lay there for a long time, staring up at the empty branches, wondering what I had just witnessed. Had the raven somehow scared the figure away? Was there some kind of connection between them? The sun was beginning to set, casting long, eerie shadows across the forest floor. I knew I couldn't stay here. I had to find shelter for the night. Despite my injured ankle, I managed to pull myself to my feet. The pain was intense, but I had to keep moving. I limped along the old logging road. The image of the raven and the fleeing figure burned into my mind. The forest no longer felt silent. It felt alive, filled with unseen forces and ancient secrets. And I had a feeling my journey through it was far from over. The pain in my ankle was excruciating with every step, but the memory of those glowing eyes kept me moving. The forest grew darker, the shadows lengthening and twisting into grotesque shapes. The air grew colder, and a thick fog began to roll in, obscuring the already faint trail. I stumbled along, using a sturdy branch I found as a makeshift crutch. The silence of the woods was broken only by my ragged breathing and the occasional snap of a twig under my weight. The encounter with the raven had given me a sliver of hope, but the fear of the figure returning still lingered, a cold knot in my stomach. As the fog thickened, visibility dropped to just a few feet. I could barely make out the trail ahead, and the trees seemed to loom out of the mist like menacing spectres. I had a growing sense of being lost, disoriented in the swirling grey. Then I heard it again, the singing. It was faint at first, carried on the fog-laden air, but it grew steadily louder, the haunting melody weaving its way through the trees. It was the same song I had heard in the tower, the ancient, melancholic tune that had driven me to the brink of madness. This time, there was no radio to drown it out. I pressed my hands over my ears, but the song seemed to penetrate my very being, resonating in my bones. It felt like the forest itself was singing, a chorus of unseen voices echoing through the mist. Panic began to set in. I stumbled faster, desperate to escape the sound, but it followed me, growing louder with every step. It felt like I was being herded, drawn deeper into the heart of the woods by the irresistible pull of the song. Suddenly, the fog parted slightly, and I saw it, a faint light flickering through the trees ahead. It looked like a fire, a small beacon in the oppressive darkness and fog. Hope surged through me. Maybe there was someone else out here. Maybe I had stumbled upon a cabin or another ranger station. I limped towards the light, the singing growing fainter as I approached. As I drew closer, I could see that it was indeed a fire, burning brightly in a small clearing. But there was no cabin, no sign of anyone else. Just the fire, casting dancing shadows on the surrounding trees. And then I saw the markings. Scratched into the smooth bark of the trees, around the clearing were the same strange symbols I had seen on the boulder near the tower. They seemed to glow faintly in the firelight, pulsating with an eerie energy. A wave of dizziness washed over me, just like before. The air grew heavy, and the feeling of intense dread returned, stronger than ever. I knew I shouldn't be here. This place felt wrong, tainted. As I tried to turn and leave, I heard a voice. Soft and low, it seemed to come from the shadows beyond the firelight. "Welcome, Ben." My blood ran cold. I froze, my heart pounding in my chest. How did it know my name? Slowly, hesitantly, I turned towards the voice, and then I saw it, standing in the shadows. Partially obscured by the fog was the figure. It looked even taller and gaunter than before, its pale skin glowing faintly in the darkness, its eyes burning with an unnatural light. It stepped closer, emerging fully into the firelight. I could see it clearly now. Its features were sharp and angular, its limbs impossibly long and thin. Its hands ended in long, bony fingers that twitched slightly. It was undeniably not human. "You followed the rules for a while," it said, its voice a low, raspy whisper that seemed to slither into my mind. "You understood the boundaries. But curiosity, it always gets the better of them, doesn't it?" I tried to speak, but my throat was dry, my voice caught in my chest. I could only stare at the creature, paralyzed by fear. The rules were simple. It continued, its glowing eyes fixed on mine. "Stay in the tower at night. Don't answer the door. Don't investigate the lights or sounds. Keep the fire burning. Offer the water. Ignore the singing. Don't stray too far after dark. And never make eye contact." It paused, its gaze intensifying. "You broke the last one, Ben, and now you're here." I finally found my voice, a weak, trembling whisper. What are you?" The creature tilted its head slightly, a strange, unsettling gesture. "We are the Watchers, the listeners, the keepers of this place. We have been here long before you came, and we will remain long after you leave." "The rules? Why the rules?" I asked, my voice gaining a little more strength. "The rules are for your protection," it said, its voice surprisingly calm. "They keep the balance. They allow you to exist here for a time." "Protection from what?" I asked, my fear momentarily overshadowed by a desperate need to understand. The creature's lips stretched into a thin, unsettling smile. "From what lies beyond the boundaries, from what sleeps beneath the mountains, from what hungers in the darkness." It took another step closer, and I could see the details of its face, the sharp cheekbones, the hollow eyes, the thin, bloodless lips. It was a face that would haunt my nightmares forever. "The rules are a fragile shield, Ben," it said. "Once broken, the protection fades. And then, you are vulnerable." It reached out a long, bony finger and gently touched the side of my face. A wave of icy coldness washed over me, seeping into my very soul. "You saw us," it whispered. "You looked into our eyes. Now you are part of this place." I tried to pull away, to run, but my injured ankle gave way, and I collapsed to the ground. The creature knelt beside me, its glowing eyes filled with a strange mixture of pity and something else, something ancient and unknowable. "Don't be afraid, Ben," it said, its voice almost soothing. "You will learn the ways of the woods. You will hear the whispers of the mountains. You will sing with the fog." It placed its cold hand on my forehead, and a wave of dizziness washed over me. My vision blurred, and the sounds of the forest began to fade. I felt myself drifting, sinking into a deep, dark abyss. The last thing I saw was the creature's face, its glowing eyes watching me, and the flickering flames of the fire dancing in the swirling fog. I don't know how long I was unconscious. When I finally awoke, the fog had lifted, and the sun was beginning to rise. I was lying in the clearing, the fire reduced to a pile of smouldering embers. The creature was gone. I sat up slowly, my body aching, my head throbbing. My ankle was still throbbing with pain. I looked around the clearing. The strange symbols on the trees seemed to have faded, almost as if they had never been there. I was alone. I don't remember much of the hike back. It was a blur of pain and exhaustion. I somehow managed to find my way back to the old logging road and eventually stumbled out onto a paved highway. A passing car stopped and picked me up. I told them I had gotten lost while hiking. I didn't mention the tower, the rules, or the creature. I knew they wouldn't believe me. I'm back in Seattle now. I quit my old job, and I'm trying to piece my life back together. But things are different now. I can still hear the singing sometimes, a faint, haunting melody that seems to come from the wind. And I often catch myself staring into the shadows, half expecting to see those glowing eyes. I still have the rule sheet. I keep it locked away in a drawer. Sometimes, late at night, I take it out and read it. The words seem to hold a different meaning now, a deeper, more sinister significance. I never went back to the Gifford-Pinchot National Forest. I don't think I ever will. But sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still see the fire lookout tower perched high on the mountain, swaying gently in the breeze. And I can't help but wonder who is up there now, following the rules, and if they will make the same mistakes I did. The forest is silent, the mountains are still, but I know the truth. They are always watching, always listening, and the rules must be followed. Or you might just become part of the woods yourself,